Hello and welcome to Magetalk, the Magetalk Community Podcast. I'm Kalen.
I'm Philip.
Hey, what is up, dude?
And wow, this might be the first just you and me episode in a long time.
I was thinking the same thing, dude. I was feeling like I missed you. I feel like we haven't done an old school. We need to just do an old school audio only episode one of these
We do.
days.
Yeah, Lord knows I'm super tired of looking so good on camera all the time.
It's got to be hard work.
It is.
Completely non-topical,
Yep.
like
And
just
I woke up
not.
and I'm like, I have to do my hair again. Like, did I tell you how often? Do you know how often I just throw in a man bun these days?
Oh, I do know because I see your Facebook updates. And I see the man bun pics. I see those come through.
We break it
I
out.
yeah, I see. I get it. But we are actually, I think this is going to be a cool topic for today. We're going to be talking about footwear, your footwear ebook that you guys
Verging on
released.
fetish. Verging on
Ver-
footwear fetish. Not foot fetish.
Virgin.
That's different.
That's a different thing. That's a
Foot
different.
fetish is not a thing I have. I have the opposite. I have a phobia of feet.
You do. Is there
But
such thing as a footwear fetish? Because I know there's sneakerheads, there's people that are very, but is there an actual fetish, whatever that definition is
I don't
of
know,
footwear?
but you know what I love? When you type in foot phobia on Google, you get this emoji. You get this the girl that has her arms crossed, and I'm like, yeah, that's that's how I feel. Is like, no, do not
Nice.
talk to me about feet. That's how I feel.
Got it.
Don't at me, bro. Don't at
Uh,
me, bro.
your video looked like it turned off for a minute, so I don't know if
No,
it's just me.
no, you got to stop. It's just got to be the internet or the bandwidth because I see my video just fine. I just look at myself this whole time. I look at myself and I look great. My
And you're
hair looks
back.
great.
Awesome. You do look great. So to
Well, let's
kick
get
this
into it a little
off,
bit.
let's get into it. I read the ebook.
Did you
It was
really?
I did. I read the whole thing. It was interesting. I'm interested to learn more about it. And so I have a few questions lined up for you.
Okay.
And but first off, like how did you, because you're pretty into shoes and stuff, like we joke about it, like
Yeah.
you have a bunch of shoes and you have like pretty decent style. Okay, I'll say you have decent style. Um
That's nice of you. Thank you for the.
that's as much as you're gonna get. But so I remember that time we were hanging out in Monrovia and you literally got stopped on the street by some guy. And the funny thing about this is I know so little about, footwear and fashion in general that I wasn't even at all impressed. I was like, he has some shoes. They look okay, fine. They look fine. But somebody stopped you on the street, and I was like, "Why are they stopping him?" My shoes are pretty decent too. Nobody's ever stopped me on the street.
I have dope shoes. Why aren't people stopping me talking about my shoes?
So anyway, they stop you on the street to ask you about your shoes. But so like, how did you get into, like, how did you get interested in? I don't know how long you've been interested in, footwear and stuff like that. But
I mean, not to make it a sob story, but my parents both were entrepreneurs when I was a kid. They had their own businesses. They were self-employed most of my life, and they struggled a little bit. And so I remember being really young and kind of wanting a pair of Air Jordans, and us not being able to afford it, and sort of being sort of ashamed that we had to have school uniforms with a particular pair of shoes. And, we couldn't afford the actual shoes that you had to wear for, the choral group, and having to buy like the off-brand shoes and like throw them in the washing machine with Rit dye, to like dye them the right color and stuff. And I remember feeling like
dude.
super, super bummed out about that. Now I look back, I'm like, geez, my parents had hustle. Like they made it work. But I remember as a kid sort of feeling like I was missing out on something. When I got older and I got my own money, I'm like, I'm going to buy all the shoes I want. Like I buy whatever shoes I want. I'm going to get my own Air Jordans, and I'll buy my own Huaraches, and nobody can tell me otherwise. So I think it's for me too. Also remember, part of the story recently is, I was 340 some pounds, and there's very few things when you're that overweight are very few things that fit fashion wise. Shoes are a constant. Like you're going to be able to find shoes that fit you pretty
Mm,
much. So it was kind of the only thing I could wear for a long time that actually expressed my personality, because most everything else, I could not buy off the rack that would fit in a way that sort of expressed my personality. So it was hair and shoes, and that's really all that there was. So I love shoes. It's been from when I was a kid. I remember being really passionate about shoes, not to make it like this really like deep thing, but for whatever reason, like shoes can be completely, uh, they, they, they can match, they can like go with an outfit, but they can also be completely contrasting. You can do like the Doctor Who thing where you're like, you're wearing a suit, right? But you've got Converse on, and it expresses something about your personality and like who you are. So yeah, so I dig it. Also, the other thing is, we've found at Something Digital that selling things online, specifically, shoes or maybe couches, or there's a bunch of certain types of products that have interesting challenges in and around themselves, like trying to sell them online have their own little challenges. So even if it's just fashion and we're talking about
mhm.
handbags or shoes or watches or something like that, they all have little idiosyncrasies in the way that you deliver a website for that. And when you're talking to a shoe brand who wants to sell shoes online, it turns out they're really, part of the way that they select who will build a site is to see if you understand the challenges that they face and to
Yeah.
talk about those specifically, right? And so that's kind of what led us to wanting to write about it. And it's a natural thing for me to be excited about shoes. So for us to create an ebook around that is, another step in sort of our positioning. If you, from a Something Digital perspective, like our talking about how we vertically position ourselves. Like we've talked about ADA compliance for a long time. We talked about PCI compliance for quite a while. It's about talking about specific modes of delivery, things that we're proficient in, that we see are differential and very unique in our
Yeah.
ecosystem.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I'm trying to look for. I had a buddy that was interested in some help around automotive, so I'm trying to find agencies
Yeah.
with really deep expert. Right. So whatever the vertical is, like I think it's really smart that you guys put that out, and I'm surprised there aren't more SIs that are putting out content. I think it shows that you guys have a deep specialty. And as I was reading it,
Mhm.
in the list of footwear sites that you guys have done, I think there was like 7 or 8 or 9.
Yep.
Pretty impressive brands. So that was cool to see. I have to ask. You mentioned that like you can wear like the Converse with a suit type of thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I don't know if this is just my perception, is that style has become cool like in recent years, like in the past, I don't know, few years. Did you do that like before it was cool, or has that like always been
Well,
okay to do?
Converse Converse is sort of timeless. Like if you were to dress up, let me give you an example. If you're going to dress up like if you have 50s night, at like the sock hop,
Yeah.
and you're going to have like a 50s night, you could wear Converse. If you had 60s, like Woodstock, peace and love, you could still wear Converse. You have 70s, like I'm going, disco, you can still wear Converse because Converse is timeless. It's like, for whatever reason, every decade for 70, 80 years, really one of the mainstays of fashion have really been the Converse canvas sneaker sort of shoe. So I think, I don't know that I would say that's a recent style thing. I would say that it's sort of a mainstay and a staple. And you see a lot of companies that continue today to sort of mimic the Converse Chuck Taylor shoe style. So I mean, I don't really know how to answer the question other than to say
But
like,
like being at like a business conference and somebody on stage wearing a
sure.
suit and like Converse, like did that happen like 10 years ago, or is
No,
that
I think that's been around for a while, but I
okay?
do think that uh, we're more accepting today of what business attire is. Or we've redefined what business attire is. In fact, Dockers as a brand, this is a whole separate little bunny trail, but I was just reading this really interesting case study. I think it was on Retail Wire, about how certain companies have like carved out greeting card holidays. Well, Dockers as a brand carved out khakis as business casual. In fact, they created the term business casual to create a market niche for
Really?
themselves that didn't exist. So when you're talking about like how fashion sort of changes from decade to decade, what I would say is that there's certain brands who have been able to sort of redefine the conversation. And I think, yeah, now more than ever, we're seeing more people are being expressive in their footwear in cases where there is a societal norm around the way that you should dress. Otherwise, you can still be a little more flexible with your shoes. And most everybody has to wear shoes, right? So and they're kind of consumable. People wear them for fashion, but these things touch the ground. They don't last forever. And so I find, yeah, it's a really interesting particular fashion.
Sorry, I think I just
Really
lost you
funny.
for a second. Oh, we're back.
No, no.
Oh,
Yeah.
cool.
No, we're here. We've never left. I've got bandwidth issues, my friend. We're just gonna have to push through it a little bit.
All right. So
Just one other thing, because I found like this was really interesting because you were talking about sort of like the timeliness of the way that I don't know that fashion is sort of being accepted across the board, especially in shoes. There was a yesterday here at this office at Palm Beach Tech, which is where Something Digital has its offices in West Palm Beach. We had the gubernatorial candidate for Florida. He was here in the office.
You're mingling with the big wigs.
Yeah, a guy named Phil Levine, and he's the mayor of Miami Beach. Really sort of a very rich guy, but he's in a full suit, and somebody pointed out his shoes, and he's wearing, Adidas Y3s, which, if you follow this sort of thing, he was wearing I think the Subaros or something like that. He was wearing like a really sort of a, like, if kind of a shoe, and one that you probably would pick up aftermarket at $250, $300. So it's not, there's a little bit of interesting. There's some interesting ways that you can, even in government and politics, that we're starting to see this play out as well.
That's cool. Yeah, it's like you guys are in a secret club with like secret handshakes, but instead of secret handshakes, it's like you look at the shoes and you give the knowing nod, and you're like, you got the this, the this and the that, the whatever, and then you're very impressed with that. So one of the things that I thought was interesting that I knew nothing about at all was you talked in the ebook about the personalization or customization of customization in general, but you talk specifically about the Nikes, I guess it's called Nike ID or something like that, where people customize. Like, I knew nothing about this whole movement, but could you talk a little bit about that? As like people like customize the shoes when they're buying them online?
Well, let's talk a little bit about what leads to customization. So one of the big things right now is having a lot of diversity in what we would call colorways. So you take one particular style of a shoe or a silhouette of a shoe. So let's say the Air Jordan. Okay. So the Air Jordan 1 has been around since like 1983. And the original shoe came out in two colors. There was like the mostly white, and then there was the black and red. And those two colors of that shoe are sort of timeless. What has happened over time is that, they release new colors and shorter runs of colors that create some exclusivity around the shoe. And once it sells out, and that's it. And then they'll embellish it a little bit. They'll make it in different fabrics. Like there's suede Jordans, there's patent leather Jordans, and you've probably seen a bunch of these, and they make them in different colors. Yeah. The thing that's happened though is that exclusivity means that there's sort of like this little subculture of people who sort of chase after the more exclusive pieces, and because they are scarce, they're hard to find, and again, like, these things aren't durable, they don't last forever, and not everybody buys them and just keeps them in the closet. Some people actually wear them, which means they can't really be found unworn. So what's happened is people want to customize it because that exclusivity, if you extend it beyond just what the company is making, people want to personalize it further. And that's what I think leads to the idea that shoes, beyond anything else, footwear brands are investing very heavily in digital commerce that's capable of doing customizer friendly products, but also creating entire supply chains that are able to back that up. And there's a bunch of companies that are doing this really well. I mean, obviously Nike and Adidas, but one of the case studies that we used, it was a company called Jack Rogers, who we built a customizer for back on a couple years ago. Even it's on Magenta 1. And if you were to take all of the colorways, all of the colors they offer, between the upper part of the sandal, the actual tread or the footwear, where the sole of your foot goes, that color, there's stitching that you can choose the color on. And then if you magnify that times size and width, they would have to have millions of combinations of shoes that are pre-made for them to be able to accommodate that. So rather than do that, they make them to order for the customer, and it leads to longer lead times to actually like make the shoe, but the customer feels way more personal. It's a much more personal connection to the customer because the customer got to choose what they wanted. If you take that even further, there's a Nike store in Japan who basically have a creative lab where in 30 minutes they'll actually hand paint and hand customize a pair of shoes that you buy off the rack. So you buy a white pair of shoes, and then they'll make them per your design. You can choose the laces right there. You can get like lace locks. You can get, specialized paint, and they actually do it. And in fact, there's a whole secondary market of people that are artists that all they do is color shoes, custom paint shoes. There's YouTubers who have millions of subscribers who all they do is paint shoes. It's crazy. The amount of culture that's developed and interest that's developed around this particular, product niche. And we're looking for this functionality. So we feel like, again, it's a thing that's specific to shoes. Not many people, some people have custom t-shirt designers, usually a graphic upload. This is so much further beyond that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's like people want to have something that as few people as possible in the world have.
Yep.
When it comes to shoes, and I've heard a few. I think I heard like a Planet Money podcast on the whole scalping and reselling industry around shoes and stuff, and people line up for days to get new shoes and then resell them, and it's
that's something we haven't really touched too much on in the show, but we did touch on it in the ebook, but we did talk about it at length in the last 2 or 3 episodes of the Future Commerce podcast. And it's a phrase that we're dubbing, or it's like a commerce flavor that we're dubbing secondhand commerce, where people are purposely buying and turning out shoes into the secondary market, where they're making lots and lots and lots of money on these, artificially limited, artificial scarcity runs of shoes. In fact, there was a shoe from a designer, a few shoes from a designer guy named Virgil Abloh, who recently has put out a bunch of Nike shoes that are in high demand, and they're going for $1,200, $1,300, $1,400 when their retail original selling price is $190. And so, and what's really crazy is that you extend that further backwards, and there are people who are selling options on something called StockX. Yeah. So what? Not everybody. It's like a lottery.
Financial markets around
shoes, and the scarcity of these shoes. So what happens is you have 7 or 8 minutes to actually like complete the transaction when you are selected to be one of the few that can buy the shoe when it drops. And once I have that, then I can sell my login as an option on the secondary market, and someone buys my login from me, and they go in, they log in as me, and they ship it to themselves, and they pay for it through my app, which is just absolutely insane. And there's nothing else. There's no other subculture in commerce that's like this, and there is not any off the shelf e-commerce platform that can do the kinds of things that that are geared for the kinds of thing,
Right.
providing the kinds of challenges that you have, especially around bots, which is a whole separate conversation. But or like, as a second part of this, the architectural challenges and the best practices, everything that you know kind of needs to be thrown out the window, because it's getting harder and harder to sell legitimately to real customers, and the bots and the hackers are getting smarter and smarter about getting the products before the legitimate folks. So so everything
Yeah, I
you know
saw
about
that.
commerce, just throw it out the window, and you have to relearn it when it comes to footwear.
Yeah, I saw that section of the ebook where you were talking about how there's certain architectural challenges to footwear sites that don't necessarily come out of the box, even with like Magento, and that I think that's super relevant to our audience. Like, I think you talked a little bit about how like colors might be something that you need to have in your filtered navigation
Right.
for footwear and then kind of creating the illusion of choice. So that's, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's an interesting thing to kind of flesh out.
Well, if you think it, like, think about, I'm trying to think about something so you just bought a bike, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you, tell me about your bike buying experience. Like, what was that like for you?
So I did it the old fashioned way. And in the past I've done a bunch of online research and stuff like that. But this time I was like, it was just spontaneous. I was like, screw it. I'm going to get one. I'm going to get a cheap bike because bikes are interesting. Like you got to spend like $1,000 to get like a air
Quote
quotes
decent.
like
Yeah.
decent bike, which is like what? So my thinking was, I was like, look, I don't even know if I'm going to use this as much as I am hoping that I intend to. So I'm going to just go to Walmart, get something that's like, 100 or 150 bucks, and then see if I actually use it. If I actually use it regularly 6 months from now, then I'll go buy a real one. So I just drove to Walmart uh, and and walked over to the bike section, looked through. There's the mountain bikes. I was like, no, I'm not gonna get a mountain bike. And then there was the hybrid bike section, and then I saw one that looked kind of nifty. So it was like 160 bucks. So I was like, I'll go with this one.
But when you went there, was there like a bunch of the same kind of bike and a bunch of different colors?
Oh, that's a really good question. I don't know. The one that I got in particular wasn't in a section with a bunch of the same color. It actually did catch my eye because of the colors. It's like
Mm.
white and black and red. It kind of caught my eye because of the colors. But I don't actually know if they had a bunch of the same bike with different colors lined up next to each other.
So the reason I ask is because let's imagine that you were gonna go buy a bike online, and it's actually a pretty apt example, because I think it'll show the kind of experience that you expect. So if you go into a store and you're at Walmart, bikes take up a little bit of real estate, right? They're large and they're probably pre-assembled. So you have a lot of the same kinds of bikes or in different genres of bikes, but they're all bikes. So bikes live in a certain section. You have, probably mountain bikes, and you have cruiser bikes like that are, fixed gear. You probably have a couple 10 speeds or like road bikes. And, as far as like the amount or number of selection, the types of bikes are limited. And then
Mhm.
of the types of bikes, you probably only have a couple brands. And of those brands, you probably only have a couple styles, like a ladies and a men's, and et cetera. So that it's actually a similar challenge. So what you wind up having is let's say that you do have a particular gender of a bike, like a bike for a guy or a unisex bike or something like that.
Mhm.
And it is from a particular brand, let's say Huffy. I don't know. Do they still make Huffy bikes? I don't know. Um, and let's say that bike comes in only 3 or 4 colors. If you were to take the entirety of that catalog and like look at how many actual products you have, it's probably 20. Like, you don't have that many products. You
Mhm.
have you have a few styles and you have a few colors of a few styles, but when you kind of expand it out, you really don't have that many products. So the challenge is, how do we replicate that feeling of having a lot of choice that you would have in store when you're looking at a whole wall of bicycles that is ostensibly only 20 SKUs? How do you take that feeling and put that online where I feel like I have a lot of choice? So what a lot of what footwear companies who have similar challenges need to do is take a lot of the same style and expand it out to where a typical catalog page might be a bunch of different products on a category, and they're tiled where you have all this choice. What they might take is the exact same product, and instead of using a configurable product in Magento that would bundle all of the simple colors together under one, they would actually replicate a configurable product for every single colorway. And that way we can merchandise them and sort them in the Magento category in a way that's pleasing, right? But the page feels full. Now, when you dive down into each of those products on the category page, like, you're still going to get the same color choice that you would get for any one of those products. But at least when you're shopping, you don't feel like it's limited to only one style of shoe. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
And that's one of the challenges. There's hundreds of little things like that. And it's not exclusive to shoes, but I feel like it's a good analog, or it's a good, what's the word? It's a good it's representative of the kind of issue that might arise in other areas like handbags, where you also have a very similar sort of challenge.
And why is it that shoes don't, why is it that there aren't a lot of styles or silhouettes of shoes? I always, for some reason, had the impression that there are like a bajillion types of shoes. And so it was a surprise to me that it's a common thing that a given shoe brand would not have a lot of different styles, and that they have to kind of create the illusion of choice with colors in that way.
Yeah, that's it's a good question. I think probably because they're really it's really resource intensive to actually construct a shoe. Yeah, I'm just going to switch to this other camera because I don't know what is up.
Okay, while you're doing that, in the live chat, yeah, the Guardian mentioned that Huffy Bikes is actually based out of Ohio. He used to work with their head of marketing.
Oh, wow.
And their site is on Nop Commerce.
Interesting.
So there you have it.
I've never even heard of Nop Commerce.
It sounds very vaguely familiar.
Oh, you know what? No, I have heard of it. It's open source, and it's .NET MVC4. Actually, I know a company that just left Magento for Nop, which is weird.
Really?
Yeah.
You know quite a bit about Nop Commerce.
Okay, so here's the deal.
Out.
Here's the deal about now I've lost my train of thought because I'm thinking about Nop. What was
the thing about why there aren't a bunch of different styles for shoes?
Oh yeah, so I think about all the things that kind of go into putting together like constructing a shoe. It's unique in that the way that the sizing works is very different from size to size. Like the actual construction and the materials and the labor intense, like how labor intensive it is to actually construct a shoe. And it changes across the sizes. So it's not just the length, but the width has to scale as well. So when you're designing a shoe, you have to design a shoe that works for all sizes, not just for one size. Right. And the word, like one of the big complaints about certain companies and the way they design shoes is they'll take a particular reference size, like for men it might be a size 10, and then they just scale it up for the rest of the other sizes or scale it down for the other sizes. And one of the problems with that is it doesn't always work, right? So there's certain areas that might become like exaggerated or look strange from size to size. So you have to have many patterns for cutting out different pieces of leather or other materials. And it has to be durable. Again, you walk on the thing. So it has to be glued and it has to be stitched in a very certain way with a certain quality material. So I would just presume that, it's also very capital intensive. We do talk about this in the ebook a little bit, that it's expensive to make shoes because you have to make them in all these different sizes and widths.
Oh, right.
Right.
That makes sense.
And
Yeah,
so
that
you
makes
have to
sense.
carry stock of these things, and so you might not even sell through all the sizes. So unlike a t-shirt where you sort of have a general, like a few general sizes, with shoes you have thousands of sizes, because when you permute size and width and color, you've got thousands of SKUs. So yeah, it's a
How do
particular
they?
challenge.
Yeah, I'm curious you talked a little bit about how they handle the supply chain for the custom products and how they don't really carry stock of those customizations, whatever those are, specific colors or things like that. But it'd be interesting if eventually, well, eventually everything's just going to be 3D printed, but be
Yeah, that
interesting.
is actually, that's a thing, right? So um, if you are interested in this stuff at all, there's a woman named Tiffany Beers who has a YouTube channel where she does sort of teardowns on shoes. And she actually just reviewed a couple different shoes. There's the Phantom Hover. Oh, wait, no, not the Phantom Hover. That's Under Armour. What shoe is it? I forget. I think it's there's a 4D shoe. Um, and it's actually 3D printed and couldn't be constructed otherwise. The heel, or the midsole, the actual sole that you walk on, is basically 3D printed, and
Hmm.
it's super futuristic looking. I don't think all 3D print has to look so futuristic, but it does change sort of the way that um, you might expect the shoe to look. The one I'm thinking of is the Reebok Liquid Float Ride. So you basically have to like change all of your manufacturing to use 3D print, and I think that we'll see a lot more 3D print. Just like we're seeing a lot of foam sole shoes right now. It's taken 5 or 10 years for everybody to sort of spool up the manufacturing processes for it. We'll probably see a lot of 3D print shoes 5 or 7 years from now. But you're right. Yeah,
Really?
it's
I
crazy.
wonder how far away that is. This is a whole other topic, but I wonder how far that away that is to where, I mean, it's somewhat foreseeable that we could just 3D print almost everything that we buy, that especially if, if they're made out of rubber and materials that aren't, things that the iPhones are made of very rare materials and things like that. But like shoes, like shirts, I wonder how soon that's
Yeah.
going to happen.
Supposedly, speaking of one of our other clients who's super into this stuff, like you can actually do weave on demand nowadays. So you can basically produce textiles on demand in the way that you might think about 3D printing for plastics. And so yeah, we're probably really close to that future, but I don't know enough about it, honestly.
Yeah. um, so what was the process of writing the book like? Well, I mean, it's not a full-on book. I mean,
Yeah, it's an
it's not like a
ebook.
700-page
No,
book
it's
or
not.
anything
It's
like
like a
that.
12-page ebook. Um, yeah, the process really for us is the same as the first two accessibility ebooks that we did last year, which is we've sort of start off with, me kind of riffing on this. Like we've produced lots of content in the past, so a lot of it really comes down to this kind of a conversation, this kind of an interaction where we're going back and forth and sort of hashing out, well, what are you work backwards. What's the main thing that you want to take away from, like, what do we want people to learn, right? And maybe there's 3 or 4 bullets. One is it's not easy being cheesy. No, it's not easy to make a website that sells shoes. It sounds easy on the surface, but it's not.
Bullet
And
point number 2, consumers shouldn't be forced to go spelunking to determine which products they can buy.
exactly. That's how you know I wrote it.
That was a gem.
It sounds like me. Yeah. So so well, if we want them to know that it's hard, then we've got to tell them why it's hard. And so so it starts off the same way that I would write a talk or a keynote, which is, what's the key thing I want you to take away? What's, and what's the journey for me to get you to that takeaway? And how do I break those pieces down into things that you can sort of digest and relate that back to our experience? And yeah, and we want this to be valuable. Like, I don't want it to be Magento centric specifically. I mean, we could tell you code and we could release open source modules and stuff. But I think from a merchant's perspective, this isn't how it's being implemented so much as we understand your pain points and we know how to solve them. And I think
Yeah.
that speaks very specifically to a particular audience, which I think was, if I'm being really honest, that's the point, right? We want merchants who sell shoes to understand that we know how to build sites that sell shoes. And so we're thinking about them first, and everything that we write in a book like this is geared toward them.
Yeah, yeah, of course. You just mentioned like modules that you guys have. Do you guys have specific modules related to like some of the things we talked about, customizations on filter navigation, or do you have like a suite
Yep.
of modules specific to Footwear?
I'm so glad you asked. We didn't actually practice this, but I'm so glad you asked. If you go to opensource.somethingdigital.com,
This is why we do the live streams, people.
we actually have a number of open source projects that we're very proud of. That not only do we contribute to, but they're open sourced. Modules for Magento. A good portion of them are Magento 1 based, and a good portion of our Magento 2 work that's in our accelerator will be released very soon. But if you want to take a look at some of the stuff that we contribute to, you'll find it there. Ajax add to cart is something that was a Magento 1 sort of specific thing. I'm looking at this now. I'm thinking, well, we probably need to update this recently. But if you go to SD Interactive on GitHub, you also see a bunch of public open source things, and one of those is a layered navigation Ajax. Which is Ajax Layered Nav, Magento 2, Something Digital, Ajax Layered Nav. And so, yeah, you should be able to touch on some of that stuff too.
Nice.
It's really cool.
This is pretty cool, man. Do you guys have other modules that aren't open source that you have in your tool belt for?
Yeah, it's not because we don't want to contribute them. It's
not everything has to be open source. I mean,
I know.
You don't have to defend it. I'm just curious what kind of functionality.
Some of them are secret sauce. I think on the other hand, some of them sort of have dependencies on other things that we've built on that we're not so. They're more bare bones and come down to like specific implementation. And so releasing them as open source is like, there wouldn't be a whole lot there. It's like a YAML file. So nice. We do. We've got a library. I mean, I'm looking at our GitHub and we have like 700 actual projects, 700 repositories. And a good portion of those are, pieces that get pulled into our accelerator that, are maintained separately.
Nice, dude.
Hundreds. Yeah.
No wonder you're always talking about all the stuff you do with faceted navigation, layered navigation.
Yeah, the layers and facets are kind of a big deal with these type of sites because everybody sort of has a different take on, what I would call information architecture, like different attributes that describe pieces of a product. Oh, here's one pet peeve. So from a Magento world, from a Magento perspective, so if by the way, this has bitten me so many times. If I go to a website and I click on a product in stock, what Magento is, so there might be like a filter that's like, show me items that are in stock, right? And show me items that are my size. Magento actually sees that query as a configurable product, as an OR condition, which is super annoying because what it will show me is a product that a configurable that has any size in stock and a configurable that has my size. But what it will not show me is a configurable product that is in stock that is my size.
Right.
That is another challenge. Like, us sort of adapting the way Magento does these things because Magento, that might be okay for a certain type of product, but it's not okay for, someone that's buying clothes or sized products online. And another thing that people is sort of the hotness right now. This is not in the ebook, but a lot of people are wanting like a guided commerce experience where there's a brief questionnaire of some sort that might ask you a question or two, like, what do you typically shop for, men or women? And I choose men. What size do you wear? And, I might choose my shirt, pants, and shoe size. We might have called that personalization at some point in the past, but what I think it really is it's well, it is personalization, but what I think it really is we're starting to understand that that's how people shop in real life. They go to the men's department, right? They wind up and that's how they want to view when I go to Macy's or Nordstrom or whatever. I want to view that I have a particular view of that company and that brand based on how I interact with them and not how they're trying to make me interact with them. And so I think that's what e-commerce is coming down to. Like, if I set that once, I expect that all of my future interactions, I don't have to set that again. You're just going to remember that I'm a dude and I have a certain size, and that's what's prioritized. Doesn't mean I can't shop for the other stuff. You'll still let me get to it. But the way that the site, like when I go to a product or a category page, it should be pre-filtered for the things that are relevant to me. Shoe wear brands are getting this really, really, they're getting it right. And they're doing it mostly on mobile apps right now. But I can set preferences and they're only going to show me things that are for me, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, that's cool. Question from Ryan here in the chat. What does ST use to store, manage your composer packages?
Ooh. It's a good question. I believe we're using Private Packagist right now. There's been a lot of conversation around this. We were doing the proxy thing for a little while. I'm not sure if we're still doing that. I haven't been on the engineering side in a little while. But we had one of those, what's it called? The composer proxy.
I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll get back to you on that one.
Yeah, we'll get back to you. I'll ask. Let me ask someone in the chat right now. I think we're using Private Torian. No, it's not Torian. It's something else. There's a mirror. Someone help me. What's the name for the mirror? Yeah, it's not package. It's not. We use packages.com for some things, but we do have self-hosted. We're sort of required to use Packagist, I believe, for some parts of the ECE workflow, because we do a lot of Magento Cloud, so we do have to have Packagist. But I think we have Private Packagist on a roadmap. But anyway, that's at least one answer to the question.
Right on. I had written this note down from earlier in the conversation, but I think I heard a podcast on this. You're talking about the super expensive shoes.
Yeah.
And I'd heard, I think it was a podcast about this NBA player, I can't remember their name, who wanted to release a shoe that was affordable. Is it Satis? Is that the one?
Yeah, Satis. Yeah, Satis mirror. Yeah.
Brian just said that in the chat. I was like, that sounds familiar. So this player wanted to release an affordable shoe. So I think and I can't remember who it was, but they put together a shoe for like $40 or something like that. Cause they're like, oh, when I was a kid, like what you said, like I couldn't afford shoes,
Mm-hmm.
and we want to like create something that people can actually afford. And it was just interesting, like, because then the perception of it is like, oh, this is a $40 shoe. Like this has got to be like a piece of crap, right? Compared to the $200, $300, $400, $500, $1,200 shoes. But the actual materials of the shoe, like it was, it's not that different from, these really expensive shoes. So I remember hearing that whole, like, I think there's a podcast on that. I thought it was interesting.
Yeah, it's Stefan Marbury is who you're talking about.
Yes, there you go. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's actually, the brand is called Starbury, Starbury.
There you go. Yeah.
I wish I were smart enough to say that I just knew that off the top of my head. I was also familiar with the story that was on like All Things Considered on like an NPR podcast not so long ago.
Yeah.
They have an interesting. They take a lot of they're doing a lot of interesting things. I think this reminds me actually a lot of the conversation that that was had around Imagine with Jamie Foxx, and he was talking about the Privé Revaux, I think
Revo.
is
Yeah.
the that brand, and they're all of like a particular price point. They're like $60 or $70 for, you know, fashion eyeglasses, fashion sunglasses.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I think you wind up having to sacrifice a lot for a particular price point. And I mean, yes, we should have affordable luxury. Like there will be people that buy it, and there will be people that will, you know, you're definitely going to get something out of it. I do think that there are products that can be, like I went to the dollar store the other day and I bought a beach towel for $1. Like we're
Nice.
talking about a big towel. I bought it for $1. You can buy a beach towel for $100 if you go to if you go to a big department store. So like you can find products of all kinds for all prices. I think it's considering like what's the application? Is it like, is it durable?
Yeah.
Yeah, I do think it's interesting. Like having a story around why you exist is super important in this space, right? Just being a shoe wear brand isn't good enough anymore. Like you have to have a story about what makes you different. And I think in this case, it's, you know, value or like some sort of reasoning around um, uh, maybe even like green or like some commitment to the environment, or there's got to be some story that's you know, that follows up your
Right.
reason to exist. Yeah.
Right. What the heck was I just gonna say? Oh, can't remember. It escapes me. I had something very interesting to say. Um, I did have a couple other questions lined up though. Um, so for the like one of the things you talked about in the ebook was with all the scalpers and stuff out there that you sometimes recommend that merchants will have resources dedicated to kind of police that or to no, I'm mixing two things up.
Yeah.
To police resellers, to police that resellers are not going below the minimum
Yeah.
advertised price and things
Yep.
like that. And I was curious whether there was like technology for that. That seems like the kind of thing that there should be, you
Yep.
know, an app for.
Yeah. So, you know, the king of minimum advertised price, or MAP, which is, you know, that's a term that's used a lot. There's a lot of automation for policing or enforcing MAP. There's a bunch of companies that exist in the world. I'm just giving you a few that are sort of like Track Street is one that's on my radar. Um, there's a bunch, but Wiser is another big one. A lot of these companies sort of brand themselves as like brand protection. So as a company that makes a product that might be sold in a bunch of venues, you want to make sure that no one of those channels is undercutting the other. In fact, if you want to read more about this, I go into great detail on a blog on somethingdigital.com/blog. There's a blog called it's something like what do you need to grow a successful e-commerce practice? And I talk about the roles that are required in an organization for you to build successful digital commerce. Like you have your director of e-commerce, but who else do you hire and what do they
Yeah.
do? Right. And so
Oh, that's cool. I
one
need
of
to read
the
that.
one of the one of the jobs of an e-commerce director is to make sure that they're not monopolizing or cannibalizing what other channels do. So if you are in wholesale, let's say you sell in a
Mhm.
department store, you don't want people to find your product cheaper at the department store than they find online, because then they won't buy online. They're going to buy from the department store,
Mhm.
right? And department stores are incentivized because they're buying your product well below retail, right? They're buying it at wholesale. And if they buy it in enough of a volume and get a good enough deal, they'll be able to mark it down significantly to drive more people into their stores to buy it. So you have to have some means of making sure they're abiding by the rules, because a department store, when they decide to put a product on sale, your transaction has been done with them for a long time. You shipped them the product months ago. They have it on hand. They want to get rid of it. They shouldn't be able to sell it for well below what you're able to sell it for. And so having those agreements in place and making sure they're abiding by the rules is a big part of this, especially when they're selling online. Again, the department store is a really good example because Nordstrom has a tremendous ad budget. So they'll go out and buy a bunch of Google Shopping ads and displace you, the manufacturer's Google Shopping ads. So while you might be spending a tremendous amount of money on paid search to drive people to your direct-to-consumer website, Nordstrom, Macy's, Zappos, Amazon, they're also buying from you and selling your product. They have more money than you'll ever have. Sorry. I need water. 1 second.
Okay. Do your thing, man. Do your thing.
Woo.
While Phil is doing that, we got a question from Super Clotted in the chat. A little bit off topic, but question about Lightspeed web server offering container licensing, whereas currently they offer a licensing based on CPU. So I guess the question was whether that's something coming out in the next couple of months. I don't actually know, but if somebody else happens to know, then they can chime in.
Wow. Yeah. That's interesting. Maybe
I had a feeling
I have no idea. I've never heard of. I don't even know what that is.
That was just a brief interlude while you got.
That's good. I needed some water. I feel like I'm coming down with something, Kalen. I'm just.
Ooh.
Yeah, it's not good. This is not good.
The last time we were doing a podcast and I was feeling like I was coming down with something, I got the worst sore throat of my entire life.
Oh, you're
The
cursing.
next like week of my life was absolute misery. So I hope that doesn't happen for you, man.
So yeah, you want to police that. So if you're going out there, you're going to have to pay somebody. You're going to have to pay somebody or hire a service like Wiser. There's tons of these services, but they basically scrape the internet to make sure that your product that's being sold by your vendors, or your wholesale accounts, that they're selling them at a fair market value, or at the agreed upon minimum advertised value. That doesn't mean there aren't ways to get around it. If you've ever seen, like, you go to buy a MacBook, everybody in the whole world sells the MacBook for the same price, except for when they don't. And then to see that price, you have to see the price in cart, or you have to buy it in a bundle, right? Because that's one way to get around it on Amazon. I can buy the product at the exact same price as you get it for everywhere else, but I'm going to give you a bunch of stuff for free to make you buy it from me. So there's a bunch of ways around it.
Is that how those bundles work? Like with when I got my camera, it was in a bundle.
Yep.
Which was much cheaper.
Yep. Well, so yeah, that's one way around it. Yeah, because then basically. Because
I was wondering, I was like, why is it so much cheaper? But it's a loophole for resellers to. That's interesting.
Yeah, and you see this too, right? Like if Amazon is spending money that they're buying product from you, let's say that they're going to consistently, you set up an agreement with them where they're going to consistently buy product from you. You're probably excited about that because Amazon is a huge marketplace and you're going to have access into all that could be buddy, printing money, right? Like you just won the lottery. The problem is that Amazon, what are you going to do when Amazon decides to sell your product below MAP? Like, there's nothing you can do. What are you going to sue Amazon? Like you
But they can't do that, right?
They can.
If they can.
They're not supposed to. I mean, you could decide not to do business with them. They're not going to accept a contract from you unless you're of a very specific size of a company. Like, they'll respect MAP for a company like Apple, but as you could see, all of the companies in the marketplace are finding ways around MAP, right? So it gets very, very touchy, and channel conflict is like its own science. But it is something that we think a lot about, and it's something that you should think a lot about, like, especially when you're working with brands that have enough money to make shoes. You should they probably at one point or another are going to look at selling outside of just online, and at that point this will become relevant. So it's something to think about.
I thought that on a related topic, you were talking about, how can a brand sell direct and avoid competing with their distributors and wholesalers, Amazon basically being, another distributor. And one of the strategies you talked about was offer unique products on your own website so that people can be introduced to you, say on Amazon, and you have a limited selection of products there. But then if they're really brand enthusiasts, they go to your website, get stuff they can't get elsewhere.
Right.
And I recently talked with a buddy of mine who has a supplements brand, and I was asking him about his Amazon strategy, and he does a similar thing.
We do a lot of work for a company called Garden of Life, and they also do a lot of supplements. They're a Nestle company, Nestle Life Sciences, and they are a giant company, right? They have if you go to anywhere, go to Walmart, Target, Whole Foods, Amazon, like Garden of Life is everywhere. But what they've done is, yes, the long tail of their they have a lot of very specific products that they only sell through gardenoflife.com. A lot of other products are only available in very specific sizes or packages at Costco or at Walmart, right? So they have product differentiation in that not a lot of people in this world need, goat milk protein. Like very few people need that. So they have a long tail of products that are offered specifically on the website for those that are, like brand enthusiasts or looking for something very specific that's not mass market. But if you need a multivitamin or just whey protein or some other kind of supplement that is more mass market friendly, you're going to find a very specific product that's made specifically for mass market at the larger retailers. And I think that's what you see too from shoewear brands like Nike, right? You're going to find at Foot Locker and all the other retailers, Champs Sports and whatever, at your local store, you're going to find a certain type of shoe. You're going to see a couple obvious shoes that will be there. You will find, the normal colors. If you want something beyond that, you wind up going direct to the consumer website. And I think that's it's a viable strategy. And you're seeing this too now, not just from health and wellness brands like Garden of Life or shoewear brands like Nike, but almost everybody is doing this now because let's face it, 4% of all retail in the United States happened on Amazon.com last year. And
Wow.
in fact, I saw this study recently back in, I think, April. Somebody said there's 100 million subscribers worldwide to Amazon Prime. And there are something to the effect of 116 million Amazon households in the United States. And they basically said that's larger than any other voting block in the United States of America. There are more people that are Amazon subscribers, Amazon Prime subscribers in the United States of America than there are people that identify as believing in a higher power. That's how much power Amazon.com has. So when you're thinking about of course you need a strategy for how you sell there. And I think, it's not just footwear, it's everybody. If you're building e-commerce, you're going to have to think about Amazon.
Yeah. Yeah. And then a question from Ryan in the chat, going back to the guided shopping experience. Does SD look at machine learning for shopping experience? Any AI machine learning trends on the radar?
Good question. Yes. We actually did a website a few years ago which utilized a product called or an open source product called Apache Mahout. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
Mahout?
Mahout.
Mahout.
Mahout. So it's very basic and sort of an early approach to machine learning. It is a very specific flavor of machine learning that sort of predates things like TensorFlow, which would be probably your modern approach to doing some sort of ML or AI. these days, so it's an algebraic approach to distributed machine learning. You still have all the same concepts like, feed forward neural networks and things like, off the top of my head, things like training data. The thing is that most people aren't doing volumes. So to answer the question directly, yes, we have experience with it. To answer the question in another way, most people can't even figure out how to get, a modal or a pop-up. Like, they can't get some of those strategies correct. Like, getting into machine learning, I think, is reserved for a certain type of a retailer. Some of our larger retailers are farming that out to services that specifically do that and only that, on a personalization perspective. And they're using, Adobe Experience Manager or something larger, to drive some of that stuff. Like Adobe Sensei is very compelling. But most people just don't have the it's just like A/B testing at large or multivariate testing at large. Most companies find that really appealing, but at the end of the day, they just don't have the traffic or the sales to warrant heavy investment in it, because they never actually get to actionable data, which is sad, but it's just the truth. Like,
oh yeah, yeah. I mean, particularly if you're talking about trying to develop any sort of machine learning technology.
right.
It's machine learning is starting to work its way into all of the products that we use, right? Like our email and product recommendation engines. I'm sure that probably every product recommendation product out there, like Nosto, and I'm sure all of those guys are starting to use AI to some extent. But that's just, in the sense that they're optimizing existing functionality a little bit further. So in some ways, it's kind of, it's boring. It's not that sexy. It's just like it's already happening.
Yeah.
But
yeah, but from a personalization perspective, like, there's a lot you can do that doesn't require machine learning. Like, I'll give you a good example. If you only use Magento Enterprise's built-in functionality, or Magento Commerce, if you only use customer segments, and we tailored site experience around customer segments, specifically only, like, let me show you a product that is complementary to a product that you previously purchased. If you only did that, you would probably, like, you could spend so much time on just that and never have to get into machine learning and have a lot of work on your hands, right? And I feel like people are abandoning the hard work for things that are more automated, when in reality, it takes actually a lot longer and it's probably more expensive for you to, and you're wasting your current opportunity that's right in front of you, by trying to invest in these, like, these overblown approaches to personalization, when in actuality, if you took that same investment and started right now on something else, you could probably drive a lot more value. You're sacrificing opportunity costs. So I'm a little cynical about some of that stuff.
Yeah, you are.
It's exciting technology, but I'm trying to figure out, outside of the realm of personalization, where that actually pays off for the customer. For the merchant, you could probably, from a fraud perspective, we were talking about fraud in footwear a little bit ago. Like, identifying a fraudulent order takes a little bit of a human eye at the moment. And there are platforms out there like Signified who are trying to get out ahead of this using AI and machine learning. Those are areas that I don't know that have a benefit for the customer. They definitely have a benefit for the merchant, but they're not sort of like sexy things that happen on the front end, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're about at our time. This is actually a little bit off topic, but got to mention it briefly, that the sales tax Supreme Court ruling that just hit, was that yesterday?
Yeah.
We're going to maybe get somebody on next week to talk a little bit more about that, but from Vertex, possibly.
Yep.
Is what I'm hearing. More and more people are telling me that. So this is wild. So is it basically, I haven't really read too much about it, but basically every state's going to start to charge sales tax? Burgundy.
No. So what actually happened was that the Supreme Court overturned a lower court ruling here in the United States that said that South Dakota could not impose on businesses willy-nilly to have to collect sales tax for selling items in South Dakota when they have no presence in South Dakota. Okay,
Yeah.
so if I don't have any offices or distribution in South Dakota, why should I have to collect sales tax in South Dakota? But they put that rule into place anyway. Wayfair went to court with South Dakota. It was upheld in the lower court that it was onerous, but the Supreme Court just overturned it. That's the gist. So what that does is it sets precedent for 49 other states to decide that they could also put laws into place that demand companies to collect sales tax for their jurisdictions as well. So nothing's changed between yesterday and today, other than we'll probably see states fall one by one to follow South Dakota's lead to collect sales tax, even if you don't do business in the state.
Yeah.
So there are companies like Vertex and TaxJar that have figured this out. But what's likely to happen is you will need, if you're doing business online, you will need tax calculation software, because I don't think that you could set up county by county tax or zip code by zip code tax tables in your e-commerce platform and have that be sort of a sustainable way of doing business going forward. You'll probably just pay some small amount of money every month to a tax platform in the same way that you pay a small percentage of revenue for credit cards. It's going to just be a cost of doing business. And you'll have to file in 50 states. That's not going to be small. So it's crazy.
That's no fun.
Yeah. So we'll have them on to talk about that.
The government continues to interfere in what was a beautiful internet.
Hey, man, two things you can always count on. Death and taxes.
Yeah, death and taxes.
Yeah.
On that note, we hope you have an excellent weekend. It's try not to be too depressed about the sales taxes.
I appreciate you getting into the Something Digital Footwear ebook guide. I'm pretty excited about that.
Yeah, man. Yeah, that was fun. It was a very interviewey dynamic.
That was weird.
It was a little weird. I know. I apologize for that. I've been getting so used to doing the interviews that I just
I miss your sort of like aloof rant, you know.
Yeah. It felt weird. We got to do a regular.
We got to do a regular episode.
Just a regular episode.
That's it. From now on, we're done with these live streams. Speaking of which, we got to jump.
All right, man. Hey, thanks for listening. Make sure to subscribe and all that stuff. And we love you, and we'll see you later. Bye.